Hello YouTube. Today we're talking about Marxism. I'm going to run you through what Marxism is, very simply put, and talk about its critique of capitalism. And I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. I don't want to get too deep into the theory and the terminology because it can get very confusing if you're not familiar with political theory. So, let's get started, shall we? What is Marxism? Well, Marxism is a socio-economic critique of capitalism, which was created by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the mid-ish 1800s. Hence why it's called Marxism, because of Karl Marx. So the whole point of Marxism is this critique of capitalism through the lens of class. So in Marxism, we view society as split into two classes. The working class, also known as the proletariat, but I'm going to be using working class because it's more approachable. So these are the people whose work is being exploited. So people working in a normal job, and this includes most people. And then we have the ruling class, or the bourgeoisie, as it is called in Marxist terminology, but I'm going to use ruling class or capitalists as a more approachable term. If you've ever heard the term bougie, it comes from the word bourgeoisie. And these are the people who own/run the companies and exploit the workers. And these are a small group of people. Marx saw history as a struggle between these two classes. He had like a whole analysis of history and how things will progress from time going on, but we're not going to get into that either. It's not important for this. So I mentioned before that there's these two classes. There's a bit more nuance to them as well if you go deeper into theory, but we're just going to keep it at this level. The working class and the ruling class. The ruling class exploits the working class. So how does that happen, you might ask? Because you go to work, you get paid for your work. How is that exploitation? You get paid to do, your job. How is that exploitation? Well, let me draw you an example here. All right, so let's think about a chair. So I'm gonna give you a simplified example of work. Of course, in the modern day especially, it's a lot more complicated than this. But I'm going to use a simple example for you to understand how the exploitation happens. So, we have a chair that is being made. So in order for that chair to get made, first we need, the raw materials. We need wood, nails, glue, a hammer, maybe a saw, all these things. But these materials and tools, someone made them. Someone cut down the tree, processed the lumber into planks, someone made the glue, someone made the nails, someone got the ore that made the end of the hammer, etc., etc. You get what I mean, right? So this we call embodied labor. So EL is what we're going to call it, because it is stuff that embodies work that has already been done. Embodied labor, right? Makes sense, right? And then, on top of that, we have living labor, LL. So this is the work that the worker puts in so that the materials turn into a chair. And that becomes the total labor, TL. The chair. It's quite simple, right? It's not very complicated. We have the materials, and the worker puts in the effort, and then we get the chair. So the embodied labor, that is usually purchased by the capitalist in this situation, or the ruling class. We don't really know where it comes from necessarily. We don't usually even ask. We just get the stuff and then we do the work. And then the living labor is the stuff that the worker does. As we can already see in this example, if one of these is missing, the chair doesn't happen. The chair doesn't happen. So now then, let's give these a value. All right. So let's say that the embodied labor cost 100, and the living labor is also worth 100. Whoop. There we go. So that would mean the total labor is worth, it's 200. Yeah. Yeah. So here we see, okay. The chair is worth 200 because the embodied labor, so the materials that the capitalist bought, cost 100, and then the living labor is another 100. So the chair is 200. Cool. So then the capitalist, of course, selling the chair, wants to get back the money that they put in through the embodied labor, the 100. So 100 goes back to the capitalist from that. Whoop. So the 100 goes back to cover the costs for the embodied labor, the materials, They want to get their money back, right? Then the capitalist also needs to pay the worker, because if they don't pay the worker, then the workers aren't going to come back, So, need to be paid. But they don't get paid 50% of the value of the chair, do they? No, they don't. They get paid less than that. Let's be generous and say that it would be 50 that they get paid. This would be the salary. So that gets split into 50. Now, those of you who are really good at math might have noticed that we're missing something. We're missing another 50. Hello. Where is it? What happened to that 50? Well, that 50 goes to the capitalist. That 50 goes to the capitalist, and it's called profit. Do you see now? So this goes to the capitalist as profit. Now, that profit, the worker doesn't get to decide what is done with the profit. The worker doesn't get to decide what that profit is done with. The capitalist does. Usually, profit in a typical company, the profit of the company is what you do with it is decided by the board of directors or the C executive, so the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, etc. So a very small group of people decides what this part here, what gets done with that. But hold on, that belongs to the worker. The 50, in this case we're being generous, the 50 that was basically stolen from the worker doesn't get to decide what's done with that. A very small group gets to decide what's done with that. That doesn't seem very fair. Why do they get to decide what's done with it? That's weird. Why do they get to decide that? And this is one of the key importances in Marxism, is the class theory and this analysis, this critique of capitalism that shows that workers are being exploited. And it also shows us that our workplaces are not democratic. They're dictatorships. The place where you work at is a dictatorship. Your boss tells you what to do. Your boss tells you when it needs to be done. Your boss tells you often also how you should do it. You don't get to decide who your boss is, who your superiors are. You don't get to decide who's the chief executive officer of the company. You don't get to decide who's on the board. You don't get to decide how the profits are used, money that was, by the way, stolen from you. You don't get to decide how the company is run, what the company's objectives are. You don't get to decide really much of anything. Or most workers don't. I mean, you might say, well, I'm going to become a CEO, etc., etc. Yes. But most workers don't have a say in this. If we flip this around, or if we change our terminology here, this becomes very interesting. So, instead of capitalist and worker, if we use master and slave, now we understand who holds the reins and who gets all of the profit from the work. It's the master, of course. The slave toils in the fields and the master reaps the benefit. The master gives some food and maybe some shelter and clothing, but, pittance, really. And that's how it's been in the past as well. We had kings who owned land that peasants worked on, so their subject works on the field. The king gets most of that work that the peasant does, and the peasant gets a pittance. And then when the king comes around, they take their hat off, they bow, and they're nice to the king. Then we had feudal lords. The feudal lords owned the land that the serfs worked. And then, the feudal lord takes most of the profits, and then the serf gets a little pittance, and when the feudal lord comes around, the serf has to take off their hat and bow and be nice. Now we have capitalists and workers, and capitalists take most of the profit and give pittance to the workers, and when the capitalist comes around, the worker has to take off their hat and be nice to the capitalist. You see? Things are not that different after all, are they? So here, it's really important to understand that the ruling class has power over everyone else. And what we mean by power is the ability to give or take away choices. So in the example that I gave above, you get to decide, where you work, but you don't get to decide how your work is done. That choice is taken away from you. Ergo, they have the power over you. And the more influence you have over someone's choices, the more power you have. And power becomes violence when you take away critical choices from people. So for example, you take away someone's choice to have a home. In other words, you evict them. This is a form of violence. So, we've established that the workplace is a dictatorship. And to me, that's egregious. You might feel differently about this, that's fine. But to me, that's egregious because we spend a lot of our adult life at the workplace. The core hours of your day, 9 to 5, and the sun is out, the weather is nice. It's at work. And we're not supposed to have a say in how things are run there? I mean, we get to have a say in how things are run in the outside of work world, and even the work world to some extent through, representational democracy. Of course, depending on country to country how that works, and we pride ourselves on democracy, right? That's an important thing about our civilization, that people can vote. Apparently not at work. At work, you can't vote. You can't vote who runs the company. You can't vote on much at all, really. Meaningful things, that is. And why? So then the question becomes, how do we get towards a more democratic workplace? I think that's a very important thing. A lot of what I'm talking about now is based off Professor Richard Wolff's work. He is a Marxist economics professor. He has really, really good stuff about Marxism and leftism and socialism. And I think he makes a very good point that democratizing the workplace is an important step in going beyond capitalism, because we spend so much of our adult life at work. Like, we have to democratize it. And the one way we can get towards that is through unions. Unions are very, very important because unions give employees, so the working class, collective bargaining power. Because if you say to your boss, like, hey, we shouldn't do, we shouldn't pollute. Let's put a really concrete example. Hey, the way that we're doing our work is harmful for the environment. We shouldn't do that. To which your boss will say, yeah, well, sucks to suck, but, we're not going to change it. And then you say, well, I'm not going to work here if you keep doing that. And they'll say, okay, bye. And then they'll hire someone else. And, individual people might do this, but this doesn't get the company to change. But if all of the workers get together and say, hey, we are not going to work if you continue polluting like this. In fact, if you do not make changes, here are our demands. If you do not change these things, we will stop working now, everyone. And then you have what is known as a strike. And that hurts the capitalist because everything stops. And this is where the key importance becomes the crucial role that the working class has. Because without the working class, Amazon, for example, okay, we're on Twitch. For example, Amazon doesn't work. The packages won't get delivered, they won't get packed, they won't get shipped. Nothing happens if the workers stop working. Doesn't matter how much money Jeff Bezos pours into a, Amazon shipping center, the money is not gonna turn into automatons and pack shit and send it. So this is a very, very important tool that the working class has so that we can have collective bargaining power. And also, the union can serve as an education tool for the working class because this stuff that I'm talking about, especially in the US, does not get taught at schools. Richard Wolff talks about this very well because when he was studying, I think he went to Harvard first to do his bachelor's, and then he did his master's in some other Ivy League school. I don't remember which one. But his point is that he had like one class where Marx was mentioned, and that's it. And the teachers were scared to talk about Marxism and socialism because they were afraid that they would lose their jobs. So there's no place for people to get educated on workers' rights, on organizing, on what the power the workers have. So the unions are an important part of that education. Unions are not perfect, however. I recognize that. There is corruption within them, absolutely. They are certainly not perfect. But they can be improved, and we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say, when it comes to unions. Let me see your comments. There's been some good conversation here. Could you? Twitch, what's going on? The problem with today's economics is that the price of everything goes up while our salaries do not. Yes. Companies refuse to pay us more money than what they have had to pay the past decade. But in the meanwhile, the other companies can pull up their price as much as they want on certain products such as food and rent. Exactly. And to top it off, to add insult to injury, productivity has also gone up. So productivity has gone up. We are working more, or we're more productive, I should say, than before. But we're not getting paid more on an equivalent scale. That's theft. Most of all, because the right constantly picks certain groups they imagine to be in power, and then they just profit from blind hate without systemic analysis at all. Absolutely, they're like, the Marxists are coming! Or like, I'm gonna use the famous Slavoj fuck, how do I pronounce his name? Slavoj Žižek. The famous quote, where are the Marxists? Where are the Marxists? He had a debate with Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson, when he was still active, he used to rage about the postmodern neo-Marxists. Where are these Marxists? I don't see any Marxists. In positions of power? What Marxists? Yeah, everyone's maximizing profits. They're mostly doing that by keeping labor and materials cheap. Yep. And more money for the workers. Yep. And that's how we get billionaires, baby. And it's fucked up. That's why there need to be national laws forcing the increases on minimum wage, because the companies won't do it unless forced to. Yup! But an important point, actually. This is another point for unions. So in Finland, where I'm from, I don't currently live in Finland. I currently live in Sweden. I don't know the history of Sweden that well, so I'm not going to comment on that. But in Finland, there is no minimum. What's the term? Minimum wage. There's no minimum wage in Finland. And the reason for that is because unions have been able to negotiate so strongly that there are general agreements on most fields, not all, but most. And because of that, there has been no need for a minimum wage in Finland. And that has been because of unions. Because unions have negotiated strong terms for all the workers of a specific field. Yeah, you wouldn't pay more for your workers exactly unless you were forced to do. Yeah, like why would you pay more? No. You have to make your shareholders happy, you know? All right, let's continue. Did I? I did, okay. So how do we get to a better world? You know, I mentioned unions as a part of this. So how do we get to a better world? Revolution, baby. Revolution. Now, before you get scared, hold on, because the knee-jerk reaction whenever someone says revolution, they think the French Revolution. They think guns, violence, blood on the streets. No, that's not what I mean. Revolution just means a fundamental change to how our society is structured and operated. For example, when we moved from monarchies to representational democracy, that was a revolution. It fundamentally changed how our society works. That's a revolution, for example. So this is what I mean when I say revolution. Don't think about guns, violence, blood on the streets. It's not what we're talking about. I don't think it's necessary. I hope it's not necessary. Something that you will hear often in leftist circles is reform versus revolution, you know? And I think it's a false dichotomy. Because reform is a tool towards revolution. So reform is important. So, you know, increasing the minimum wage. That's cool. Women's suffrage. Like, these are all reforms, you know? But they cannot be the end-all be-all. So if we increase the minimum wage, for example, let's say it would be increased to $20 an hour in the US, which would be a lot higher than it is now. I think it is, the highest it is $15 an hour in some states. But I think nationally in the US, it's like $7 something. Let's say it would be raised to $20. We can't stop there. Or let's say we give healthcare to everyone in the US, affordable healthcare. We don't stop there. That's just one step to the revolution beyond capitalism. And in the same way, you know, democratizing the workplace is a step. Our work doesn't stop there. That's the important thing I think we need to realize about the revolution versus reform. It's not one or the other. It's both together. How we can get to a better future. A fairer future. A more just future. A good example of this is, think back to when there was slavery in the US and they were talking about abolishing slavery. Some people said, okay, we need to give the slaves better housing, better food, better clothes, treat them nicer. Some people are saying, what are you talking about? No, what are you talking about? We want to abolish slavery. We don't want to make the slaves' living conditions nicer. We don't want to give them more food and clothing. No, we want to make them equal people and free people with their own ownership of their own life. And that's how you can also think about this revolution, is we don't want to just give the working class a little bit better conditions. No, we want to get rid of this dichotomy, the working class and the ruling class. We want to get rid of that, the capitalist and the worker. We want to abolish that. That's the point. That's the point. Some counter arguments that you will probably hear from people who are more on the right side of things, especially on the libertarian right side of things. A very common counterpoint, which I've also argued with some people about, is, well, the employer took the risk by starting the company, by founding the company, by, spending their blood, sweat, and tears at the start to make it happen. They took a risk, which is true. They did take a risk. It is true. They did. But so did the employee. The employee took a risk by moving to a new place, for example, a new town, a new country. That's a huge risk. What if it doesn't work out? You'll have to move back. It's a huge mental strain. It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of risk involved in there. They also took a risk by assuming that the job will be there in a year, 2 years, 5 years. They might get fired. You never know. They also took a risk by putting their livelihood in someone's hands. The capitalist, the employer, holds their livelihood in their hand. Because if they lose the job, that's their source of income. In some countries, there are better protections against that. In some countries, there aren't, like the US. Another comment that you will hear a lot is that people's main motivator is money. We need money because people won't do stuff otherwise. Which, money can be a motivator. It can be. But ask them, if they go with this, ask them, why do you read? Why do you write? Why do you watch TV shows? Why do you play games? They're probably not going to say because they get paid to do that, unless they specifically do get paid to do that. But most people don't do those things on their free time because they get paid to do that. Or why do you play with your pet? Why do you help your friend do something? And when they ask, then when they want to pay you, you say, no, I will absolutely not accept money from you. I'm doing this because I want to help you. It's because we're motivated by other things than money. Feeling of accomplishment, feeling of helping, enjoyment, fun. There are a lot of other things that motivate us. Another thing that you can also bring up to these people is that, open source software exists. Linux, for example, is an open source software. Or Wikipedia, an open source project. And these projects are not made because of money. People make them because they enjoy doing those things for other reasons. So money being the main motivator for people is objectively not true. We have other motivators. We don't need money as the only motivator. So to cap this off, now we've learned about the very basics of what Marxism is and how it critiques capitalism. And if you stick around and you've listened to this and you're still saying, nah, I think the current system is cool, okay. At least you've listened. You've thought about it. And that's the question I want to leave this off with. Why do you accept the system you are in? Really think about that. Why do you accept the system that you live in. Think about it. And thank you very much for watching this video. Hello, YouTube. If you like this video, please do like, comment, and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.